Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today, we're jumping right into a pretty fascinating journey to demystify the invisible machine that, honestly, quite literally runs the modern world. We're looking at the anatomy of supply chain excellence. Now, whether you're just wondering how products magically show up at your front door overnight, or you're a professional trying to connect the dots of a massive global operation, you're definitely in the right place. We're going to use a really clear top-down roadmap today to master exactly what supply chain excellence looks like, how it functions, and ultimately how it drives success. Let's get into it.
Okay, let's dive into this top-down roadmap. First up, we've got the supply chain journey, where we map out the physical flow. Second, the pillars of strategic excellence. Third, the 10 core values. And finally, the path to profit.
So, part one, the supply chain journey, mapping the physical flow. Before we get into any high-level strategy, we've got to ground ourselves in the physical reality of how things actually move. This right here is the physical machine, basically a linear 7-step flow. Just think about your smartphone for a second. It starts way back with the supplier providing the raw materials. Then procurement steps in to source those materials strategically. Next step is manufacturing, where the phone is actually put together. From there, it flows over to a warehouse for storage, hits transportation to move to regional distribution centers, and finally, it arrives at its ultimate destination, the customer. It's literally a global, continuous relay race. Each tangible link has to connect seamlessly to the next, because if just one handoff gets dropped, say, a truck is delayed or a warehouse misplaces a pallet, the entire chain just stalls out. Now, understanding that physical relay race is super important, but it really forces a much bigger question. With all those moving parts scattered across the globe, what actually makes a supply chain excellent? Because, just moving boxes from point A to point B is really just table stakes at this point. How do executives actually define and measure operational success in a way that separates just an average operation from a truly world-class one?
Well, that brings us to part two, pillars of strategic excellence, also known as the executive scorecard.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how we take these somewhat abstract business concepts and anchor them to hard, concrete measurements across this 10-pillar matrix. Let's just highlight two standout areas here so you can see how this works in practice. Look at cost leadership. The business value there is reducing end-to-end costs. The executive KPI they're tracking is supply chain cost as a percentage of sales. And the expected impact? A pretty massive 8 to 15% cost reduction. Now scan down to the bottom and look at sustainability. The goal here is a lower environmental impact, and they measure that specifically by tracking CO2 emissions, which, as we know, directly impacts the company's ESG score. So this scorecard basically translates physical movement into actual strategic power.
To really get a feel for the kind of pressure these KPIs put on an organization, look at this target right here, 98% plus. This specific metric falls right under the customer excellence pillar. It stands for On-Time In-Full, or OTIF. Think about how annoying it is when it's something you order online is delayed by just a single day, right? Now, try to imagine guaranteeing that kind of perfection on a massive global scale. It's an incredibly high bar, but it's one that world-class supply chains absolutely have to clear to guarantee customer satisfaction. And hey, if 98% sounds demanding, check out this target, greater than 99.8%. That is the baseline for warehouse picking accuracy. So, under the warehouse excellence pillar, operations have to be incredibly fast, but also incredibly safe. And to pull that off, there is virtually zero margin for error on the warehouse floor. It really just goes to show the extreme, laser-like precision that's required out there every single day. Let's briefly compare two of the expected impacts from that executive scorecard we just looked at. On the left, you've got cost leadership, aiming for an 8 to 15% cost reduction. But over on the right, inventory optimization targets a much steeper 20 to 35% inventory reduction. So why the big difference? Well, cost reduction is really about trimming expenses across the entire end-to-end journey. Inventory reduction, though, that is specifically about improving working capital. It's all about freeing up trapped cash because, let's be real, stock just sitting idle in a warehouse is basically money doing absolutely nothing. Businesses need to free that up so they can invest it somewhere else.
All right, so with the physical steps mapped out and our scorecard set, we reach part three, the 10 core values, or the DNA of excellence. These values definitely don't exist in a vacuum. They actually cascade. It all starts with a customer-first mindset, where you're demanding perfect order delivery and super fast response times. But here's the catch. To get that perfect delivery, you absolutely have to have value number two, end-to-end visibility. I mean, you can't manage what you can't see, right? And once you have that real-time tracking and transparency, it completely unlocks value 3, agility, which gives you flexible sourcing and lets you bounce back fast from disruptions. That agility is maintained by value 4, operational excellence, which leans heavily on lean processes. And naturally, a lean process results in value 5, inventory optimization, which ensures you've got the exact right stock in the exact right location at the perfect time. Let's move to and see how this builds through the final 5 values. To lower your logistics and procurement costs, which is our cost optimization, you really need deep collaboration. That means working closely both internally with your teams and externally with your partners. Now, that level of teamwork means everybody needs to be speaking the same language, which brings us to data-driven decisions using AI and business intelligence. Using all that intelligent data helps you design value 9, sustainability, pushing towards green logistics and a more circular economy. And finally, the whole shebang culminates in value 10, continuous innovation. I actually want to focus pretty closely on continuous innovation for a second, because this is the modern frontier. We are talking about relying heavily on automation, robotics, AI, IoT, and digital twins. And if you aren't familiar, a digital twin is essentially a virtual replica of your physical supply chain that you can use for testing and predicting things without risking any of your real-world assets. A world-class operation today isn't just about manual labor anymore. It relies on this kind of cutting-edge technology to stay ahead of global disruptions, predict shifts in demand, and just continuously reinvent itself. And that brings us to our grand finale, part 4, the path to profit. And this brilliantly illustrates the entire philosophy we've been unpacking today. Just look at this logical progression here. When you have true data visibility, you can apply really smart analytics. Those analytics then empower your teams to make much faster decisions. Faster, more accurate decisions naturally eliminate waste, which drives lower costs. And inevitably, lower costs across your entire operation equal higher profit. So, mastering this entire framework isn't just some academic exercise in logistics. It's quite literally the ultimate equation for building a highly profitable, incredibly resilient business. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a bit of a provocative question to chew on. Where does your supply chain need the most visibility? Think back to that physical flow we mapped out, those high-pressure executive KPIs we reviewed, and of course, that ultimate equation to profit. Pinpointing your blind spots is really the very first step toward achieving absolute excellence. So keep this top-down framework in mind, try to apply it to what you're seeing in the real world, and honestly, just never stop learning. Thanks so much for joining me today.